Welcome back to Silicon Heartland Sessions. Today's guest is a powerhouse of perspective in enterprise architecture, education, and community. I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Fulton, enterprise architect at Koch, adjunct faculty at The Ohio State University, and co-founder of tech community Nexus, a leadership network focused on helping technologists elevate their impact at the executive level. Michael's career is a masterclass in scaling influence, whether that's within Fortune 500 organizations, shaping future leaders in the classroom, or building vibrant communities that empower tech executives to lead with purpose. Throughout our conversation, we'll delve into personal leadership, organizational innovation, and the role of community in scaling sustainable change. We'll also be weaving in insights from several influential books that have shaped Michael's thinking, including The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, Designed for Digital by Jeannie Ross, How Organizations Should Work by Dean Meyer, as well as a couple of podcasts, including Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future by Maureen Metcalf, and It's All About the Team by Jim Tressel. And these works offer valuable perspectives on topics ranging from DevOps and digital transformation to organizational design and team dynamics. Additionally, Michael's deep expertise and passion for enterprise architecture will provide meaningful insights for anyone currently in an architecture role or aspiring to enter the field. His perspectives will illuminate how EA serves as both a strategic discipline and a catalyst for innovation. Michael, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Sean. I am excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, me too, man. We go way back, and I've had you on the radar for quite a long time. I think we've got a lot in common in terms of what we're passionate about: EA, enterprise architecture, obviously, community, education. So this should be a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a good time, and I'm sure we're gonna cover a lot of ground.
Heck yeah. So I guess I wanted to start at kind of this intersection, of enterprise, education, and entrepreneurship that you find yourself in. How do you approach work-life balance across so many roles?
That's a great question, Sean, and a tough one right out of the gate. I would say if my wife was sitting here next to me, she probably would say that I don't do it very well. But I think what I really try to do when it comes to all of these sorts of different things that I'm involved with is I try to find ways to get involved with things where there's synergy, where there's overlap in the various efforts, where I can create opportunities for 1 + 1 to equal 3.
Yeah, I like
that's
that.
a really important way to be able to do that. It's a good example, right? Is I think about my job at Koch, my day job as an enterprise architect. It's important for me to understand not only emerging technologies, but it's also important for me to understand how IT works, right? And so when I go to Ohio State and I teach my students about how IT works and I teach my students about digital transformation, it forces me to continue to stay up to date on what's going on in the industry. And I'm able to bring back what I'm teaching, bring back what I'm learning back into my day job, and it makes me better at my day job. And then as I try things out in my day job, I've got this environment where I'm actually doing the things I'm talking about in class. I'm able to make my teaching better because I have that practical experience I can talk to and talk about in class. Similarly with my community involvement, I'm a big believer that technology is changing so rapidly that the only way that any of us can possibly keep up is by learning together. I think we have to be in community. I think we have to have conversations with really smart people. And I think we have to learn from each other. We can't go off and try and learn everything on our own. There's no way we can ever keep up with all of the change that happens in our industry. But by being in community, by talking to really smart people like you and some of the other folks that you've had on this podcast, I learn things that I can take back to my day job every conversation that I have almost. And so it allows me to be better at my work. So I think it's all about synergy. It's about that
Yeah.
element of 1 + 1 = 3.
I love that 1 + 1 = 3. I have to say, I hope the folks that are listening appreciate the fact that we're using this as a springboard for this conversation. Because I know for myself, I've, I don't want to speak for you, but I know for myself and lots of folks in the community really struggle with how do I balance all the different things that I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a lot of folks out there that would love to aspire to having the kind of responsibilities you have within the context of your day job. That's a big role. Enterprise architecture at Koch, certainly a role that I'm very, very passionate about myself.
Sure. Yeah.
But then balancing that out with the other things that you're really passionate about, being an entrepreneur, being a teacher, and so forth. And there's a you I think for all of us, there's a very unique formula that we all have to try to find so that we can create these synergies. And synergy, I love that word. That's the key to sustainment in my mind, especially for somebody like you who is just so passionate and so involved in so many big things.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would highlight, and this came from a mentor of mine many, many years ago. And I've repeated this to so many people throughout the years. Work is endless, right? When you think about your day job, there will always be more work to do.
Yeah.
The company doesn't pay you just for the work that you do. They pay you also to make decisions about what work you will not do. Right.
Well said.
And
Yeah.
it's really important for us to remember that, right? Because we could work 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a day, um,
Mm-hmm.
a week, not a day. That would be a problem. The work would be there to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have to make choices. We have to make choices on what are the most important things we're going to work on, and
Mm-hmm.
how do we stay focused on those most important things. And then we draw the line that's right for ourselves, right?
Right. Right.
Is it appropriate for me to work 45, 50 hours a week, but maybe somebody else needs to work 30? Maybe somebody else is in a different stage of life and has the ability and desire to work 60, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to do what's right for us. We're all in different stages of life,
Well
um,
said.
but we have to make those choices.
Well, and I imagine that focusing on outcomes as opposed to focusing on activities is a key part of your success. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not about how many hours. And I have to constantly remind myself of this. And I'm not do as I say, not as I do to some extent, but it's
I
not
can
about
relate.
how many hours you work. It's about the outcomes that you deliver. Right. And if we can stay focused on that, then we're keeping the right things, the right things. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's really where we have to stay. And sometimes it's hard to get people that we work with to make that shift. We may already be there. We may be focused on outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
but there's in a lot of organizations a culture where people look around, and if it's 8 o'clock and you're not already in your seat, people are looking around and wondering why not. If it's 5 o'clock and you've already left, people are noticing that in some cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this is a big part of my challenge personally with the whole return to office movement post COVID. Right, I think COVID forced us to think differently about work. But it forced us to think about and manage people. It forced good managers to think about and manage people based on outcomes rather than hours. And when we force people back into the office, part of the assumption there is we have to see them in their seats or they're not working.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's really that old school hours not outcomes mindset. So if we really cared about outcomes, does it matter where we do the work?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't as much.
Right.
So does it matter how much time you put in? And I think generative AI and the tools that we're now equipped with and have the possibility to take advantage of, um, again, fundamentally change the equation. I could
Hmm.
spend 8 hours writing that article, or I could leverage generative AI to help me and spend 30 minutes to get a better outcome,
Hmm.
right? So which
Yeah.
one is better for the organization, A or B?
Yeah. I hear you. You've mentioned a few things here in terms of some of the habits and so forth that you're now cultivating. Obviously, generative AI is one of them. I'm with you. Leveraging Gen AI has really been a game changer for me in terms of boosting my productivity, not just the productivity, but the quality of the output as well. And
Mhm.
obviously, there's a fine balance there, because there's only so much that we should outsource to AI. I don't want to jump into AI just yet. I am really curious though. When I think about the narrative that you just went through,
Mhm.
the word that comes to my mind is discipline. There's some mental discipline that you have to have on a day by day basis to keep yourself focused on outcomes as opposed to activities. And like you said, to have the discipline to focus on the things that matter and to ignore the things that don't matter, which can be hard. It can be hard to be able to decipher what are the right things to focus on versus the things that are really really making an impact. When you think about and the other thing is this too, just to weave it, not to make it even more complicated, but there are things that we can control. There are things that we bring to the equation. You mentioned culture. There are things that the organization brings to the equation as
Right.
well that you have some influence over, but obviously not complete influence over. And then there's some things that you just have no influence over at all.
Right.
And balancing those things really takes, I imagine, it takes discipline. It takes, in some cases, it probably takes courage. In some cases, it takes organizational awareness and what the priorities of the organization are and so forth. So to make sure you're focusing on the right things. I'm curious, given that as a backdrop, what are like some of the habits and the lessons, like the day-to-day habits that you use that play a key role in your success on a day-by-day basis?
You covered a lot of ground with that with that question. Um, I think I think some of it um, simply comes with experience, with my background, right?
Hmm.
You talked about what I'm doing now, but prior to my current portfolio career, I actually have had a pretty wide variety of roles across a number of organizations. I've done just
Hmm.
about every role in IT over the years. I have worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, three different Fortune 100 equivalent companies. I've
Hmm.
worked for some really small companies. I worked for mid-sized companies. I worked for consulting. I worked for vendor. I worked for probably 23, 24 of my 30 plus year career on the enterprise side and the corporate side.
Hmm.
So I've seen a lot of variety there. Um,
I believe
and I
it.
would say that probably the thing that really shifted my thinking was the most beneficial for me when it comes to this element of outcomes versus hours is when I had the opportunity at a smaller organization. I've done this a couple of times now to actually run a business unit where I had profit and loss responsibility, right? When I did that, what it really cemented in my mind is I started to care about a completely different set of things.
Hmm.
I still had a
Yeah.
technology background. I was still doing technology work, but the technology wasn't what was important, right? Was I bringing in revenue for the organization? Was I delivering customer satisfaction? Was I doing all these other things? I had a completely different set of outcome metrics that I cared about that I had never really paid a lot of attention to prior
Hmm.
to that as an IT person. So now, having had that experience, when I go into my role as an enterprise architect, I naturally think about those things more than I ever did before. I think about what matters to my CIO, right? I think about uptime and availability, reliability, cost structures. in a much different way. I think about what matters to our business unit leaders around, are we actually shipping product in a timely manner? Are we producing quality product? Are we delivering revenue? Are we providing great customer service? Right. So rather than thinking just about the technology and how am I going to deliver this technology project, it forces me to keep those other things in mind, which then kind of funnels down into my mindset for how I put the outcomes in front of the hours when I look at the work that I do.
I think there's something to be said, and for especially for the community and those that are listening, that there is tremendous value that comes out of new experiences. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you pursued this role, where you had P&L responsibilities and so forth. I found in my own career that oftentimes the greatest learnings come from those roles or those opportunities that I said yes to,
Mhm.
that maybe weren't on my radar. And when I tend to think, and I imagine it's probably pretty common, that when you think about your career trajectory, you tend to think about just like the straight line. It's like
Right.
I'm gonna be an app dev, then I'm gonna be a manager, then I'm gonna be a director, then I'm gonna be a and I think there's something to be said for taking a more circuitous route, so that by the time you do achieve a different level of responsibility in terms of leadership and management and so forth, it really gives you, um, like you said, it's wisdom that's born out of experience. It helps give you a completely different perspective on how to view what you do on a day by day basis and how that connects directly to the business.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was actually in a coaching conversation just yesterday where we were talking about this. We were discussing the fact that a lot of people in IT organizations that get into leadership roles tend to have had very siloed careers. They
Yeah.
started in infrastructure and they now have worked themselves all the way up to be the head of the infrastructure organization
Hmm.
for their company. Or they started an app dev and they've been an app dev their entire career, or
Right.
whatever. For whatever reason, that tends to be fairly common within IT. But what it ends up doing is when you get to the top, when you get to that leadership, that executive level where you're part of the IT leadership team or you're the CIO, if you've had that siloed career, then it gets really hard for you to understand what else is going on in the
Right.
organization. And so it's part of what I teach at Ohio State, right? My class is called Managing Digital, and I
Hmm.
explain it as everything you need to know about IT except for how to code. And the way I am trying to talk about it to my students, right? Um, Throughout their journey over the 4 years at Ohio State, my class is usually the last course that they take before they graduate, right? Throughout their journey, they've gotten a lot of content. They've got
Hmm.
a lot of content in some very specific areas. But what they haven't gotten is a lot of context. And
Hmm.
so what I try to give them with my course is the context for how IT works more broadly. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to our work, right? The work that you do, your job and the day-to-day activities that you do is akin to your
Hmm.
content, right? But how do you understand the context of everything else going on in IT? How do you understand what the work of your project manager is if you're an application developer, right? When that project manager asks you, "Hey, are you done with your code release for this week?" Um,
Hmm.
you're annoyed by that as a developer, right? But
Hmm.
if you've been a project manager before, you understand why. And so you're more
Yeah.
likely to give them what they need proactively,
Yeah.
and whatnot. If you are a project manager and you've been a developer before, you understand how important it is as a developer to get into a flow, to have that sort of dedicated time, focus time where you can really get in that flow and focus to be able to deliver the outcomes that you're trying to do as a developer, right? So as a project manager, maybe you're not scheduling 30-minute meetings with that developer 5 times a day. You're
Hmm.
thinking about scheduling things very, very differently because you've had that experience. You can help the people that you work with. I'm a big believer, and I shared this yesterday. Um, I'm a big believer in everybody that joins IT ought to start in operations. They ought
Hmm.
to do
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
equivalent of carrying a pager, right? And do
Hmm.
that for 6 months. If you are interacting with customers, if you're hearing customer problems, if you are dealing with solving and troubleshooting and navigating incidents and all the things that come with being on the help desk, you will get a much greater sense of what it means to be in IT
Right.
than if you start as a developer. If you've been in operations, you're going to think a lot more about, is this code I write properly tested? Is it going to wake somebody up tonight when I
Right.
put it into production? Right. You,
Well
you,
said.
you start to think about these things if you've got that broader context to work from. And
Right.
I'm a big believer in that. There's a similar concept you may be familiar with of T-shaped individuals, right?
Yep.
People that
Hmm.
have this breadth of knowledge across areas. And typically it's most commonly talked about in the IT world as technology breadth and then depth on a specific technology. But I think it's the same thing is true for the processes of IT, for the roles of IT.
Yeah.
I think the more you can understand how other people in IT have to work to do their jobs, the better you can do your job.
Hmm. You keep, yeah, as you've been describing your experience and your philosophy and so forth, it strikes me that you keep on coming back to this concept of we. Like, I know you keep on saying context and content, and that's really, really insightful because I guess the way I think of it is as a technologist, I imagine I could speak for other technologists as well. You come into technology because you want to learn new skills. You're passionate about, learning how to do software development or do testing or information security and so forth. To your point, that's all
Mhm.
the content. That's all the skills. That's the stuff that you need to be able to do on a day by day basis to be successful. But that's that context that gives you that wider awareness in terms of the connectivity with the business. But to your point, coming back to the use of the word we, it gives you the ability to empathize and put yourself in other people's shoes, because at the end of the day, we tend to forget that our jobs aren't, the outcome isn't, the technology itself. It's how that technology is serving our business. It's serving the people that are leveraging those technologies. And so having that context, that contextual awareness is, it feels to me like I would say that feels to me like that's your superpower.
Yeah, it is, and we talk about it in both my class, but also we talked about it from a brand and a product perspective back when I was a P&G. We talked about a concept called a moment of truth, right?
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
is the moment of truth for your product? For whether that's a physical product like laundry detergent back from my P&G days, or whether that's a digital product like the application that we built and support, right?
Hmm.
There is a moment of truth where the consumer of that product uses it to generate value.
Right.
What is
Right.
happening in that moment of truth? That's the point where everything comes together. If we don't deliver in the moment of truth, nothing else matters, right?
Yeah. Well said.
Everything else breaks down. And so, how do we keep that moment of truth top of mind and understand how what we're doing impacts the moment of truth?
I love it. I love it. And there's a really interesting intersection here. I love how you just so naturally just use the word we. Like every time you're talking about the things that you've been successful with. You always use the word we, and I love that. And when you talk about like the moment of truth, to me, that's another way to sort of encapsulate this concept of outcomes. Like that's the outcome. We're working together to deliver this particular outcome for this particular moment of truth. So I'm curious, as we've been talking here, I kind of go back to one of the books you'd mentioned to me. This book I'm sorry, it's a podcast. It's all about the team by Jim Tressel,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this concept is applicable not only with what we do, but in sports and so forth. It really has to do with collective outcomes. Are there, when you think about your role, the variety of different roles that you have and the outcomes you're striving to achieve, and the collective outcomes that you're trying to achieve together, are there practices that you've adopted that help elevate both your individual performance as well as your teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of different concepts that I'll weave into my answer for that. The first one that I think is critically important is the concept of a shared vision, right? What's the North Star? Where are you headed? How are
Yeah,
we painting that shared vision that we can all rally behind as an organization, as a team, as to what is the outcome we're trying to deliver and how are we all going to impact that outcome? In the podcast, Jim Tressel or some of his guests might talk about the shared vision being to win a national championship, right? And everything that goes into that in sports. Uh,
yeah,
what's our version in IT of winning a national championship? Right? Is it
yeah,
our launching our product in market and delivering those moments of truth for our customers? Is that our national championship? How do we think about that? Right. So, what
yeah,
is the shared vision? Making sure that we're all on the same page related to that. I think the concept of communications and organizational change management is critically important. It's not enough to have a shared vision. You have to talk about the vision. You have to share the vision. You have to communicate the vision broadly across the organization. And you have to do that on an ongoing, consistent basis. If you aren't doing that on an ongoing, consistent basis, then people will tend to lose focus on it. It will tend to fall to the wayside
yeah.
as
Great.
the day to day gets gets additional focus because of the overwhelmingness of the mundane, right? How do
Hmm.
we navigate that? So that's a second thing. And then as a leader, and I may be kind of answering a later question that we were going to get to, but one of the leadership philosophies that I'm a big believer in and have really appreciated when I've seen my leaders do this well is servant leadership, right? Coming to the table with a mindset of as a leader, how am I first helping and supporting my team? How am I talking them through and eliminating blockers for them? How am I supporting them on their learning journey as they deal with challenges? I'm not giving them the answers, I'm not solving the problems for them, but I'm helping them through the process of doing that. And again, it's almost that idea of as a leader in an organization, you are almost as much a coach
Hmm.
as anything else, right?
Right.
You're teaching, you're practicing, you're guiding, but it all starts with that, to me, that shared vision, and then making sure the shared vision gets communicated and then leading appropriately through that.
Right. And we will definitely have an opportunity to get more into these concepts around servant leadership and so forth. I sort of want to dive into a little bit, and maybe pull the thread, the enterprise architecture thread. When you think about the unique perspective that you bring to the equation, I'm curious, how has your enterprise architecture background sort of shape the way that you create a shared, to use your words, create a shared vision and communicate it on an ongoing basis?
It's a great question, and let me answer it with a couple of different things.
Hmm.
The first, I'll just talk really briefly about my journey to become an enterprise architect, right?
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, I've done a lot of different jobs in IT. I started out in operations. I spent some time as a developer. I spent some time as a project manager. I became a solution architect. And for me personally, I was successful. I did a good job,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of those roles were challenging for me. They were hard. They were draining for me. They didn't give me energy, right? And when I first moved into an enterprise architecture role, it was like the heavens had opened up. Um,
Yeah.
it was like my job just all of a sudden got easier, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, I actually started at Ohio State as a doctor.
Wow.
I wanted to go into emergency medicine,
Really?
and my grand plan was I wanted to be in emergency medicine. Then I wanted to move into hospital administration, and then I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to build computer systems for hospitals. All right, that was my grand career journey. So when I went to Ohio State,
Wow.
I was getting a business major in MIS, but I was also doing all the pre-med stuff. My wife, my girlfriend at the time, looked at me and said, "Why the heck are you pounding your head against the wall with all these organic chemistry classes where you're spending 20 hours a week studying and you're getting C's, and your IT classes, you are literally not spending any more than 30 minutes a week and you're getting straight A's?
Right,
Are you
right.
really doing the right thing?" Right? It's the same way with this move into architecture for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's all you have to find what's right for you and how your brain works, right?
100%. Yeah.
And when I got into an architecture role, an enterprise architecture role is about seeing the bigger picture, taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture. It's about connecting the dots. It's not necessarily about all of the detail oriented work that you have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do to be a developer or a project manager. It's not about the same level of customer service and troubleshooting that you have to be able to navigate, and problem solving that you have to be able to navigate as a person in operations. It's a different way of thinking. And
It
what
really is.
I found when I got into the role was that thinking aligned with how my brain worked. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a critically important part of everyone's journey. And I've talked to a lot of people over the years about that. There are so many different roles in IT. There is a role for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's brain fits into one of the roles in IT because we
Yeah.
need such a wide variety of people. So
Totally agree.
I think that's a really important piece of it. Now, to the flip side, right, of the conversation, now that I've been in enterprise architecture roles, right, I learned how to drive systems thinking. I've learned how to incorporate architectural thinking into the way that I work. And as I've gone into other adjacent roles throughout my career, whether it's technology innovation or strategy or leadership or executive roles, I've brought my architectural mindset and my architectural thinking into every one of those roles. And it has made me a better leader. It has made me a better strategist. It has made me a better innovator as a result.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of value in the architectural mindsets and thinking that you do uh,
Mm-hmm.
as an enterprise architect, and being able to bring those into other roles. I actually think enterprise architecture is a really good feather to have in your cap to be a CIO someday, right?
Yeah.
It's a way of thinking that can provide you a tremendous amount of value. I'm also a big believer that a CIO needs to do all the other jobs too, right? So you can't just be an enterprise architect for 20 years and
Right.
expect to be made a CIO and do a good job at it.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
You need to do more than that.
Yeah, as you grow in your career, you have to be able to think at high level as well as low level as well. I do think that there's something like what you were saying was really resonating with me. Relative to like the mindset that you have to be effectively to be in an architecture role, and it's applicable to other roles as well.
Mhm.
I've mentored architects in my career that really failed to make that leap. It's counterintuitive in my opinion, and it's difficult to sort of free yourself from diving into the details and having the discipline to want to dive in the details because there's safety there. There's safety in understanding the details, And when you've got a when you're trying to drive a design or you're making decisions at that higher level, it can be challenging, not just from a mindset perspective, but from an influence perspective as well.
Sure.
I'll never forget. If you've been in enterprise architecture circles long enough, you've found yourself in a conversation about how do you measure the value of enterprise architecture? How do
Sure.
you measure
Yeah.
the value of architecture? And I'll never forget one of my bosses back when I was working at Huntington pulled me into his office, and he's a great guy. And he comes to me and he's like, "Hey, can you tell me why are enterprise architects also whiny about trying to find the value of architecture?" And I was like, I'd never really thought about it like that before, but here's my opinion. Here's the way that I think about it. Architecture is an abstract. It's a very abstract, strategic kind of a role. And at the end of the day, when a project is delivered, there are tangible, valuable deliverables that can easily be measured. You can measure net promoter score. You can measure customer experience. You can measure things like transaction volumes and things like that. Things that really kind of go to the developers and the folks who are the hands-on folks who have these concrete deliverables that they're delivering. And you have to be, as an architect, be willing to kind of be the person in the background that's providing direction and providing influence and so forth, and helping folks to see the way in which systems need to be architected together to produce an outcome. But those deliverables are somewhat intangible outside of like the specific diagrams and so forth, or the narratives that you're providing. And
Right.
you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be okay with that.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely accurate. I think the other challenge for anybody that's been in the architecture space for a while, right? You will have either seen or had this happen to you where a new CIO joins an organization,
Mm-hmm.
or there's a significant business change event, and there needs to be a cost cutting that occurs or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And someone will look around the organization and they will see the enterprise architecture team, and they will see that that's a bunch of really experienced,
And
really
expensive.
expensive people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not 100% sure what they're doing for me.
Right.
Right. And so, because I've not been articulated the value of what they do. And so, since I don't know what they do and I don't understand their value, let me just get rid of them. And
Right.
what inevitably happens, and I have seen this happen for the last 20 years, and I have seen this happen in organization after organization after organization. Inevitably, what happens is um, that change event occurs, the change gets made, they eliminate an enterprise architecture function, and it usually takes a minimum of 3 months, but no longer than 6 months. And then all of a sudden, the organization starts to see the mess creep back in. They start to see things get back out of control, and they start to see the spaghetti reemerge.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to realize maybe this is what the architects did for me.
Right.
Maybe I
Right.
did really need them.
Yeah.
And eventually, organizations almost invariably have to go stand up another enterprise architecture team and start the cycle all over again. And I think
Very true.
when architects harp on value, I think it's from a mindset of experience that says, I've seen this happen. And because we haven't been able to articulate the value in a way that resonates,
Mm-hmm.
and can clearly tie back to us and not anybody else, This is why we seem to be continually coming up on the chopping block. I
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
why it's largely an ongoing conversation, but
Yeah.
it is interesting.
I agree. I To sort of wrap it up at least in my mind, I think one of enterprise architecture's greatest values is providing structure in complexity. Being able to
Yes.
make sense of very complex ecosystems. I mean, our enterprise landscapes are across the board very complex. They grow over time organically. You've got overlapping capabilities and a whole hodgepodge of different technologies and so forth. And it does being able to influence requires, in my mind, an enterprise architecture or a strategic kind of a mindset. Do you as you've progressed in your career and been in a variety of different roles, and the stuff that you're doing today with Tech
Mhm.
Community Nexus and so forth, do you and even like academia, you're teaching at OSU. Do you find that your EA mindset influences how you like lead those cross-functional teams?
It really does, right? And
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you just said so that people don't miss it, right?
Mhm.
There is incredible power in making the complex simple. It's got to be just simple enough, but not too simple. And it is really, really hard to do that, right? And if you are a good enterprise architect,
Mhm.
what makes you a good enterprise architect is really honing that skill in a lot of ways. It's one of several things that makes you a good enterprise architect. If you can get really good at that, you will be good at the job, right? And that is a skill that is incredibly valuable in other roles, right?
Mhm.
That ability to make the complex simple, but not too simple.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of thought.
Mhm.
And um, a having done it in an enterprise architecture role for a number of years, I naturally tend to now um, lean towards that with the things that I create. And I also tend to notice it when I see things that other people create, when
Mhm.
too much of the complexity creeps in, right?
Right.
And I'm able to proactively provide feedback to people before they go try to communicate their message. And I can now explain to them why their message isn't going to land with the people they would need it to land to because they've let that complexity creep back in.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. If there's one thing, kind of going back a little bit to our conversation earlier about T-shaped resources and sort of the importance of content and context, I
Mhm.
would say that in all of these technology disciplines, regardless of what you're doing, there's a common thread that we all need to be honing, and that common thread is leadership, being able to
Mhm.
lead. Regardless of whether you formally manage teams and so forth. Everybody should be aspiring to being a leader. What does leadership mean? It's part of it is having the right influence, being able to influence the culture of your organization. But at the end of the day, to your point, I think it all comes down to driving towards outcomes. You
Mhm.
know, and so in the book, great book by the way, by Dean Meyer, How Organizations Should Work, he frames leadership as highly collaborative and context sensitive. And I'm wondering, how do in all the different roles that you find yourself in, all the different contexts that you find yourself in, how do you adjust your approach when moving between sectors or teams with different needs?
That's a great question. I think there's a part of knowing your audience, knowing
Yeah.
um, what is the level of understanding of your audience, right? And I would say being a teacher, you have to get really, really good at that, right? You're teaching a classroom of, in my case, fourth year seniors in college that have a certain set of understanding about technology and are really smart, but don't have that corpus of knowledge yet. They don't have that experience to tap into and really understand. And so
Yeah.
I have to um, be able to take what I've learned over the years and make sure that I'm communicating that to them at their level, right? I want them to learn, but if I'm not communicating at their context, at their level, then they won't be able to understand what I'm sharing. So, as a teacher, especially a teacher who's coming from industry that is got a lot of experience, you have to get really good at that really quickly. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it was one of the things I struggled with the most, right? And I would say
Yeah.
same is true um, when you do public speaking. Throughout a number of my different roles, whether it's internal to the company, whether it's training, whether it's teaching, whether it's speaking at conferences, all of that. When you are in front of an audience, you are the expert. You're sharing your knowledge, but you have to understand that not everyone is coming from the same place. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to figure out how to put yourself into their journey and bring them along. And if you've got a room of 10 people that are really knowledgeable, then you can accelerate the journey and you can go pretty deep. If you got a room of 200 people from all walks of life, then you got to start pretty broad and assume a very base level of knowledge and try to give people something that fits with everyone. And
Right.
so I think those pieces of putting yourself in the shoes of your audience, understanding the context of where they're coming from, um, whether it's a presentation or just a discussion, I think is critically important to being able to convey your message as a leader.
Right.
And like you said, my context at Koch is very different than my context at OSU, than my context in the community, uh,
Yeah.
and so I have to shift every time I'm in a different conversation.
Oh, I believe it, man. I believe it. I mean, those are very, very different audiences,
But
very different contexts.
at the same time, though, you still have to be true to who you are at your core, right?
100%, man.
You're not
Well said.
changing who you are for
Mm-hmm.
the conversation. You're just changing your communication approach to help your communication be more effective for your audience. Communication, I know it's an old saying, but communication isn't about what you say, it's about what your audience hears.
Mm-hmm.
And you always have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about, setting the context and the importance of, creating a shared vision and reminding folks about that shared vision and so forth. But you also mentioned earlier this concept of servant leadership and talked a
Mhm.
bit about, things like removing blockers and so forth. And I have to, when I think about what we're trying to accomplish and the why um, behind what we're trying to accomplish. In my mind, that's the fuel of the rocket. But there's a lot to be said for how we go about doing it and giving our people, the people that are on our teams, the latitude to be able to creatively decide the what, like how we're going to go about doing something, the tools that you bring to bear, the techniques and so forth, and the innovation and so forth. When you think about innovation and creativity, how do you cultivate that creativity and innovation, whether in strategy or in teaching or, just within technology in general?
Well, I think you just kind of hit on it a little bit, right? If you are leading a team and you're trying to cultivate innovation, I think you have to stay in the what. You have to stay in the outcome. You have to stay in the shared vision and provide them freedom with the how, right? You can you can support, you can coach, you can help when asked, but you want to create an environment where your team feels safe to try new things. Your team feels safe to do it their way. Because for most things, there is not one right way. There's a lot of ways that things can get done. If you're focused on outcomes, you don't care as much about how your team gets something done, and you can create an environment that gives them the freedom for that. Now, obviously, there are certain situations, certain instances where you have to be a little bit more specific to the how. When you're in a regulatory environment, you may have to put some restrictions, some guardrails up around some of those sorts of things. If you're in a situation where personal safety, physical safety is an issue, if you're working in a plant or things like that, you may have to be a little bit more prescriptive on the how, right?
Right.
But for the kind of work that we talk about in IT, we can provide people with a lot more freedom of flexibility, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and we can create environments where they can feel comfortable with that. And I think the other thing, right? And we talk about this in class. There's a study, and this years ago now that this study was done, but it was a study done by Google that looked at the various factors that drove team effectiveness. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the number one factor driving team effectiveness, according to the study, was the creating of an environment of psychological safety, right? If you have a team where the team is comfortable sharing feedback, if you have a team where the team is comfortable taking risks and not being afraid of failure, if you have a team where your environment is open to diversity of thought, to different perspectives, that team, as it's been proven through study, that team will be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think creating an environment of psychological safety is an important element of being a great leader.
Yeah, I would agree. In all the conversations that I have, when the conversation steers towards innovation, this concept of psychological safety always comes up. It always emerges. They really kind of go hand in hand for a variety of reasons. I think the main reason is because with innovation comes the risk of failure.
Yeah.
I think there are other things as well. With innovation comes you have to be willing to sort of put your ideas in the spotlight for scrutiny. For
Mhm.
folks to look at it and go, hey, whether that and provide feedback as to whether that's a good idea or a bad idea or somewhere in between. And I think there are a lot of folks who that really scares them. And
Yeah.
rightly so. I mean, it's having a spotlight shine on you, especially when you've got metrics and goals and so forth at the corporate level that can run counter to this notion of failure that can create very, very tangible fear for folks, and it can dampen innovation. It can dampen creativity. So
Yeah.
I'm just
I,
I'm
I think it's apropos because you and I have
yeah.
both spent significant time in technology innovation roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where this was front and center for us to be thinking about because of the environment we were in and the objectives that we had and the outcomes we were trying to deliver. We had to keep this front and center. But back to Dean's book that we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he mentions in that book is that innovation is everyone's job,
Right.
and we all have to bring innovation to our work on a day-to-day basis. And so if you believe that to be true, and I do, I firmly believe that, then we all, doesn't matter what role we're in, what our team looks like, we need to create that safety for people to actually innovate, for them to be effective at that. So I think it's not just about the roles that we've been in, but it's about every role in IT. We have to create that environment where people can innovate on a day to day basis.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would agree with you. And when you think about the outcome of innovation, it really, in my mind, bigger picture perspective comes back to the legacy that we leave behind in our leadership, the influence that we've had, the impact that we've had on
Mhm.
others, not only, the customers and so forth that we're serving, but probably primarily the folks that we work with on a day by day basis, what they think, and how we've helped them to kind of come along and so forth, and creating safety and inspiring them with a vision and all those other things that we've been talking about. How do you ensure that your leadership leaves a lasting impact on future generations?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways that you can think about legacy. For me, though, it's been more about the personal side of it, right? How am I impacting people that I work with? I've
Mhm.
always been a big believer in coaching and mentoring.
Yep.
So I've had a number of mentees throughout the years. Um, I would say over the last 15 years, probably 30 or 40, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
People that I've mentored in different forms and fashions over the years. Um, Typically, a number of those are inside my company, but almost always a number of those are also outside of my company, people in the community. So I do think that piece is an important thing that any of us can do, because there's almost always someone that's in a different place in the journey as you are, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
when I talk about my startup, the tech community Nexus, um, the that's all about the journey of the tech leader, right?
Right.
And
Right.
how do we help and support the tech leader along every stage of that journey? But we all go through the journey, right?
Mhm.
Whether you're just starting out as a kid sitting in my class, getting ready to graduate and trying to figure out what the world's going to look like, or you're someone that's been in IT for a couple of years now, like your son Jonathan, who is amazing. He's
Thank
on
you.
a different stage of his journey, and he is going to do great things. But what he needs to continue to take that next step is different than what that graduating senior needs. It's different than what that
Yeah.
person that's been doing it for 10 years needs. I was just actually reading a study this morning that talks about how mid career professionals are actually having a tremendous amount of challenge right now with um, dissatisfaction at work. They're having struggles with figuring out what comes next and how do they
Mhm.
navigate their journey. Those people that are kind of in that 10 to 14 years of their career are the study suggested that those folks are really, really struggling right now, uh,
Yeah.
as they look at another 20 or 30 years to go, faced with this massive thing that looks like it could impact every single job in unknown ways called AI, right? But all of these other emerging technologies that are coming, they're starting probably in that phase of life to have a different set of responsibilities where they may have families, they may have um, house payments that they never had before, right? Right, there's these folks that are in this, they're in a different phase of the journey. How can
Yeah.
folks that have been through that help them get through that and get on to the next phase, right? And so,
Right.
I mean, that's a big piece of it, is figuring out how you can find somebody that you can help and bring
Yeah.
them along on the journey.
That's amazing. Wow. There is, I'm sort of resisting the urge to jump into the AI element of what you just said. I think that I'm really interested in talking a bit about Tech Community Nexus. I guess when I think about some of the struggles that you were just mentioning that folks
Mhm.
deal with on a day by day basis, yes, I agree with you. technology is advancing at an ever rapid pace.
Mhm.
AI is definitely a huge disruptor, not just, for all of us individually and the skills and so forth that we have, and how AI is going to augment those skills, and what are the new skills we need to be using and building, and so forth. But what's it doing to the industry? There's a lot of things that we don't know.
Right.
And I think it's human nature to latch onto that. And the other thing is that I think as humans, kind of going back to our conversation earlier about having this very sort of set, rigid thinking about the way in which our careers should progress.
Mhm.
Um, I think some folks could use assistance to sort of unshackle themselves from these preconceived notions that they have for what success really means, and given themselves the freedom to be able to find new opportunities that might be a different route than they had sort of envisioned when they first started their career. And so, given all of that, all of the complexity of navigating your career journey as a technologist, and you trying to fill that void with the tech community Nexus, and elevating these tech leaders. I'm just wondering. I think it would provide a lot of value to the community if maybe you talked a bit about what Tech Community Nexus is, and sort of help us to better appreciate the role that Tech Community Nexus and the community at large plays in innovation and in leadership growth.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So, Tech Community Nexus is an organization that is all about coming alongside the tech leader and helping them through their journey, right? Whether it's the early stages of their journey where they're in a growth stage, maybe they're early on in their career, or maybe they're an aspiring CIO but haven't gotten there yet. And they want to figure out what they need to learn and develop and grow to be able to do that. Or maybe they're in a seat as a tech leader, maybe they're in a seat as a CIO, and they're maybe starting to think about what comes next. They want to
Right.
they want to start to share some thought leadership. They want to start to get some exposure to who they are as a brand, so that they can start to have some opportunities come to them, so they can maybe find that next thing. And that doesn't even have to be as a CIO, but even when you're earlier on in your journey and you're looking for whatever those opportunities that might come next, having that exposure allows people to understand who you are and how you might help them, and to
Right.
be able to bring those opportunities to you. So, growth, exposure, and then the last element of the nexus is um, wayfinding. As you try to navigate this career journey, how do we help you find your way? How do we help you find that next thing? Whether that next thing might be a new job, or maybe it's some nonprofit work, or maybe it's a mentor that you want to
Mm.
help, or maybe it's participating in a board. But how do we help you navigate your career journey and help you figure out what's next?
Hmm.
So we kind of are focused on these three elements of growth, exposure, and wayfinding. And
Hmm.
and at the core of what we do is community. Again,
Right.
back to that thing of what we were talking about earlier. Um, the world is changing so fast. We cannot keep up with this on our own. We have to be in it together. We have to learn
Hmm.
together. We have to support each other for us to really be able to navigate this complex, volatile world that we live in. And so, to me, the community element of the Nexus is such a critical component of it that we're trying to bring to the forefront. And we see a lot of things around health and wellness, mental health, people
Hmm.
struggling because post COVID, we've created environments where we've lost that sense of community in a lot of places. Now, you and I are incredibly fortunate to be here in Central Ohio, where
Yeah.
we can stand on the shoulders of some really amazing leaders,
Hmm.
folks like Ben Blankera and Steve Greeter and Angelo Mazzacco and many, many others that
Heck
have
yeah.
created this amazing community, collegiate, helpful, collaborative community here in Central Ohio. And I think what you're doing with the Cloud Nirvana is helping to continue to stand on their shoulders and be part of what comes next. That's
Hmm.
part of the inspiration of what we're doing with the Tech Community Nexus as well. We
Right.
want to continue to support the community here in Central Ohio and beyond, and
Yep.
we want to continue to bring people together.
That's wonderful. And I can't imagine anybody at any walk, within the context of their journey, whether they're just starting out or they're a seasoned executive, that doesn't aspire, doesn't need assistance from a growth, exposure, and wayfinding perspective, right? I mean, we're all on this journey together. There really is no, I mean, I guess I'll speak for myself. I don't think about any of this as a destination. It's really about a journey, and how much value can we provide? How much can I learn along the way? How many new, people can I
Mhm.
create and cultivate relationships with, and so forth along the way.
Couldn't agree
And
more.
so, given that, how can folks get engaged with Tech Community Nexus?
Well, we have a couple of different ways. You can reach out to me or one of my co-founders, Jason Skidmore and Troy Gibson. We'd be happy to talk to you about what we're doing and share some different ways you can engage.
Hmm.
I know it's timely. The podcast will probably release after our upcoming events,
Hmm.
but we're running a Nexus Converge event here in a couple of weeks where we're creating an opportunity for the community to come together and learn. We're going to have a really interesting innovation and leadership story that we're going to talk through on stage with a gentleman, a doctor named Naveen Goyal. Naveen is a physician who became a four-time founder of
Wow.
various startup companies, and
Hmm.
then eventually became a venture capitalist, and now runs a
Wow.
venture capital fund. And he's going to talk a little bit about the the pivots, the ebbs, the flows, what he's learned about strategy, what he's learned about innovation, what he's learned about leadership along the way. So those Converge events are a great place to get engaged. There'll be other things as we continue to expand our startup and bring it to life. But those would be a couple.
That's awesome, man. And I'll speak for myself. I am, first of all, grateful that you're doing this,
Mhm.
and I really look forward to being engaged and learning and growing and making new connections. So thank you for your leadership. This is really, really exciting, man.
So we're having a blast with it.
Awesome. I bet. I tell you what, Michael, I want to be, respectful of your time. This has really been a rich and just such an energizing conversation. To me, this conversation is one that connects strategy and technology and systems, but also, our soul.
Yeah,
This has really been great. So, from leading inside enterprise to shaping future architects and building the tech community nexus, you've really demonstrated that influence is earned over time through service and intentionality. So thank you, man.
thank you. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Hey, I tell you what, before we wrap, I do have one last question for you.
Okay.
If you could leave our listeners with just one lasting takeaway, something they can carry forward in their own journey as leaders and technologists, what would it be?
You aren't on the journey alone. It's always better to go together.
Hell yeah. I love it, man. I tell you what,
And
thank you again. Yeah.
I just want to say before you sign off, I
Yeah.
appreciate having you as one of the people that has come alongside me on my journey. So
My
I
pleasure,
enjoy
man.
and appreciate and admire you, Sean, and everything that you're doing. And thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Well, and likewise, I'll throw it back at you, man. I am honored to include you in my tribe of mentors.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. You've really reminded me that legacy isn't built by accident. It's really crafted one moment, one relationship, one insight at a time. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Um, so to our listeners, thank you for joining us in Silicon Heartland Sessions. And if today's conversation challenged or inspired you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. And until next time, lead with clarity, build with purpose, and stay rooted in what matters most. See you next time.